Hey there, a special shout out, a special thank you to all of you who support this podcast by buying us a cup of coffee, reading the newsletter, and listening to the show. We're about halfway through season 11, and we couldn't have gotten this far without you. I've said that before, I'll say it again, because it's true. There's no other way to do this without... Sorry for the interruption, but my dog just fell off of his bed, and he looks very confused. There's really no other way to do this, and we certainly appreciate the support. You can find the Buy Us a Coffee link in this podcast's show notes. Now, on to the show. You okay, buddy? Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Season 11, Episode 5 of the Coffee People Podcast, which is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network and presented by Roastery Coffee Packaging. You can find them online at roastery.com or probably at a coffee convention somewhere near you sometime soon. I'm Ryan Woldt, and this is the show where we meet and chat with roasters and baristas and green coffee importers. Really anyone who touches the world of coffee, farmers, scientists, artists, writers, activists, competitors. I mean, the list is really endless. Today we're chatting with Addison Mathis of Perc Coffee in Atlanta, Georgia. They are the Quality Assurance Manager at Perc, and I think the perfect guest for us to close out the first half of this season of Coffee People. Find them on Instagram at A Specialty Bean, and be sure to check out perccoffee.com. Perc is spelled P-E-R-C. You can also tap those links in this podcast's show notes. I met Addison at the Specialty Coffee Expo earlier this year. They were making coffee drinks at the Minor Figures booth, and the coffee cocktail I tried legitimately stopped me in my tracks. Considering the chaos of the expo floor, I'd say that was a standout moment. I reached out to Addison to ask how they developed the drink and to learn more about their coffee journey. I'm excited to share our conversation with you, and as I always do when I'm celebrating a milestone, I'm drinking a cup of coffee. I went lo-fi today and brewed a whole pot of Santo, a medium roast from Chiapas, Mexico, roasted by our partner Me and My Uncle Coffee, which you can find online at mamucoffee.com, in my simple coffee brewer. I'm recording this intro at home, but when it airs, I'll be on the road, drinking coffee somewhere else, somewhere in the middle of America. I hope to see you out there. Until then, make sure your coffee mug is full, because it is time for another Coffee People podcast conversation. This one with Addison Mathis, Quality Assurance Manager at Perc Coffee in Atlanta, Georgia.
So my name is Addison Mathis. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I have been working with Perc Coffee for the past 3.5 years for the entirety of my time here in Atlanta, and I am currently their Quality Assurance Manager and Head of Training. So I oversee quality of product and service for our now 6 retail cafes. And spend a lot of time helping baristas feel super equipped to do their jobs.
That's 6, including the one that's opening currently.
Correct.
By the time this is out, it will have opened.
Yes.
I thank you for being here right in the middle of all of this chaos. I have a extremely important question to ask. I start off a lot of shows this way, and I always have like one or two that I try to work between. But do you have a favorite Keanu Reeves movie?
I actually am not well versed in the movie world, so I don't know. I'm not familiar with a lot of movies. I am trying to get better though, so I do very passionately accept recommendations.
All right, I'm going to suggest that you watch The Lake House with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock.
Oh, Sandra Bullock, into it.
Yeah, save your judgment for the end.
Okay.
And just enjoy what is a shocking movie that was ever made.
Incredible.
Well, I want to know who you are. I mean, what's your backstory? Where did you come from? I know you're in Atlanta now, but where did this coffee journey start for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. And that was where I experienced my first specialty cafe. When I was in high school, I went to a shop called Bold Bean that my friends were obsessed with. And I think I kind of fell in love with like the culture and the space of coffee before I became interested in the product itself. And just, I really liked that it was a place where I felt like comfortable, and it was just a place to like be out of my house and hang out with my friends and like drink an iced vanilla latte and have a good time. And I always felt like something was kind of drawing me to coffee. And so I moved to Tallahassee, where I went to college after high school. And one of my friends had a job at a cafe, and I was like, sure, sounds fun. I could use some extra money. And so I started working with him, and I absolutely just like, I don't know, kind of fell head over heels for it, because it was like, it just felt so community focused. And a lot of my coworkers were so creative, and they cared so much about like providing really good hospitality. And it just felt like a really special thing to be a part of. And so that's kind of what pulled me in. And then I started becoming more interested in it. And then I ended up getting a second part-time job at a more specialty cafe, and was doing that while I was in school. And I studied psychology in college, initially thinking that I wanted to be a therapist, and then decided that that was not for me. And so I became a therapist in a different way when I became a barista, I guess.
Yeah, just a therapist who doesn't get paid as much.
Exactly.
Right? But has just as hard of a career.
Yeah. I think baristas, especially the baristas who work on the floor 5 hours, or sorry, 5 days a week, are some of the most resilient folks. They, have conversations with all kinds of people.
I spent decades working in the bar business and behind the bar and running restaurants. And I spent 1 year working as a barista, and it was the hardest year of my hospitality career by a mile.
That's wild.
And I was sucked in by the community of it as well, with no understanding of the coffee side. But at the end of the year, I was like, I'm going to go back over there where I make more money, but I'm going to just appreciate what we've achieved here. So you're starting to move into specialty. That's because you're starting to appreciate the coffee side of it more, in addition to the community, I assume. How did that path go from that first specialty experience to where you're at now in Atlanta?
Yeah. So some of my coworkers in that shop were plugged in with like the greater coffee community, which I really didn't have a concept of until I started hearing them talk about their friends all over the country, all over the world, who they would see at like expo and competition, which I didn't really know anything about at the time. And I was working there for a couple of years, and then the pandemic started, and things got weird for me, as I think they did for most people, to put it as long story short as possible. And kind of I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go down the therapy route still at that point, but I kind of approached my life in the sense of like, I will do the next thing that makes sense. And if something stops making sense, then I pivot away and try to figure out what the next thing is. And so working in coffee in Tallahassee kind of stopped making sense. And I wanted to be in a bigger city, and around more coffee communities specifically, because I had like gotten a little taste of it, and I just really wanted to be around people who were as excited about coffee as me. So I had friends who lived in Atlanta who were like, if you want to move here, you can live on our couch for a month while you start work and like figure your stuff out. So that's exactly what I did. I got a job at Perc, and I think like a week later I was driving up with my Prius packed full of some furniture and clothes, and I just started. And that my first day of work here, at the beginning of my time in Atlanta, felt just like an immediate affirmation that I had made a really good decision in coming, because I was surrounded by so many people who cared so much about each other and about the craft of coffee, which was like my dream. It was something that I knew I really wanted. And so, yeah, it was a really special time, and just have kind of continued to enjoy all of different rabbit holes of coffee that I have fallen down since.
I can see you almost getting a little emotional about remembering, that first experience. And I'll also say the Prius is an underrated moving van.
Absolutely. You can fit so
Unbelievable.
much in a Prius.
Thinking back about that at the beginning of the pandemic, which is way further back than we even realize day to day, and this new journey that you're on, did you think then, having that affirmation that I have found my place in this coffee community, or did you see it more as this is a place where I can grow in this community?
I think it felt more of the former right off the bat, because what I came into and what I saw was a team of people who really cared about serving excellent coffee, but who also really believed in each other in a way that I think I hadn't experienced in a team format quite like that. And so it just felt really special to be a part of. A lot of the growth that happened for me shortly after I started here in Atlanta came from my direct boss, who would come to me and basically say, like, hey, I see a potential in you to be really good at this thing. Like, let's figure out how to get you there. So a few months after I started, I became a lead barista and helped open the second Perc location in Atlanta, which was a very challenging experience for me. I had trained people before, but like not up to the par and standards that we hold at Perc. So it was a learning experience for sure.
Well, and since then, you have gone way further down the rabbit hole than most coffee people do, and you've joined the competition circuit. I met you at the Specialty Coffee Expo in Chicago, where you had developed a coffee cocktail for the event. When did you start seeing coffee as more than going to work every day baristaing, but as being part of this other side of coffee that most people don't see? And I say that having recently come from the expo, and you're surrounded by 10, 15,000 other people who are all in that same mindset for the most part, but realizing that's still a really small subset of people generally.
Yeah, so it all started with someone who was my coworker when I started at Perc, who is now my best friend. His name is Daniel Boris. I think maybe my first week at Perc, he just said to me, "You're going to be the world barista champion one day," and I, I had no idea what that meant. Like my friend in Tallahassee had done Brewers Cup once, I think, and so I had like a concept of the competition, but really didn't know much about it. And so I went home that night and I watched a routine. I just typed in like barista competition. And then I think Lem's world routine from 2016 was the first one that came up. And I watched it and I just started crying. And I think I've spent like a lot of time in just reflection, especially on my time in the competition circuit, reflecting on that. And I think it kind of came from this expression of like, just really being dedicated to a craft so much that you're willing to put that much of yourself into this like performance and this presentation, and paying attention to all of the details and then watching that be really celebrated. It was like watching someone care a lot was being really celebrated. And that was, I don't know, that kind of, I was like, okay, I think there's something here. I think that maybe I want to do this one day. And in 2022, they released a lottery for the spots at nationals. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll throw my name in a hat. We'll see what happens. They got waitlisted at first, and then I got a spot off the lottery. And at that point, I had 5 weeks to go from not really knowing anything about competition to being on the stage and doing that thing. And I crashed coursed it. I reached out to every person who would tell me anything about competition, and I just took down the most random notes, even though I didn't know what any of it meant. And I showed up and I made it to semifinals that year somehow. And from that moment, kind of knew that I loved it. And I'll never forget the feeling of walking into Expo, because I had never been. That was my first year. And just seeing so many people who like I have watched their routines and I have like learned from them through Instagram, or people who I had like met on the internet but never thought I would ever see in real life. all of these people coming together, like the community. I've never felt something quite like that.
How important is winning?
That's the question.
Is that the goal, or is the drive because of the experience and the passion for crafting something that you're proud of? Where does winning fit into that?
That is a great question. And I think that if you had asked me a year ago, I would have a different answer. Because I think the first year, and I think the beginning of last season competing, I really wanted to be there for the experience, to be around so many people and to like have all of the pre-performance jitters in the prep room where there are like all of these super badass coffee professionals just like talking about really nerdy niche coffee things, and you're getting to taste some of the best coffees in the entire world, which is just a really special thing to experience. And the process of crafting a routine and learning the competition and spending a lot of time with the coffee is a super educational one. I think I've learned a lot of what I know about coffee just from preparing for competition and being in that environment. So that's continues to be a big motivating force for me. I would like to win one day because I mean, for the obvious reason that like it's cool to win, and it gets you access to a lot of resources, basically, which I think is why a lot of, well, I actually won't speak for a lot of folks, but I think that's a big part of why some people who compete, who I've talked to, like to compete. I also think that whether it is me or not, I would love to see more marginalized folks like placing in the top 6 and winning the competition. I really want to win as a trans person who's disabled, to kind of have more of a platform for talking about those things and more like overtly normalizing those things' presence in coffee, because I think there are a lot of small subsets of the community where they're like really understood and really respected, and like where transness is really celebrated, and then there are other pockets of the community where that is less the case.
Sure.
So that piece also feels important to me.
Coffee shops in general, I often find a more welcoming environment than other places in the community, where maybe not less welcoming, but not as overtly accepting either. You just don't see the recognition of it, so to speak. You mentioned disability. We actually rescheduled this because you were having a flare up of symptoms from PCS, which I believe is post concussion syndrome. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, what it is and how it impacts your day to day, and in particular, working in coffee.
Yeah. So for those folks who may not be familiar, PCS or post-concussion syndrome is essentially the chronic experience of concussion recovery, which for most people is temporary. Um, Over the past 7 years, I've had dozens plus concussions and different head injuries that have created some things that in the past couple of years I've come to understand as disabilities and things that I need accommodations for. And throughout the past 7 years, I've understood it in a lot of different ways, and it's definitely been a learning process to be patient with myself and also understand that just because I need accommodations and sometimes I have less hours in a day than other people, it doesn't make my work any less valuable or efficient. Yeah, I think that's been a hard pill for me to swallow as someone who used to like love running at 130% all of the time. I physically can't do it anymore. So in that way, it has brought me to really value rest. I I wear like loops, the noise volume reducing earplugs in a lot of situations. Like if the cafe is really busy, especially at trade shows like Expo where there's so much background noise going on, that helps me keep my symptoms in control. I'm also like kind of photosensitive, so I have to avoid bright flashing lights, which don't really deal with a lot of light sensitivity relative to coffee. But I guess the biggest thing it affects in my day to day is just I need breaks. And I am really lucky that my coworkers and my boss are like very understanding of my needs and haven't asked me to explain myself or defend myself when I say this is exactly what I need. They just believe me and trust me, which I think is rare when you have an invisible disability, especially in the workplace.
When people don't understand something, whether it's intentional or not, they're trying to make sense of it for themselves to justify a behavior. And in reality, just because they don't understand it doesn't mean it's not real. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But we kind of go about our life trying to figure the world out around us. And when something comes to us that we don't understand, it's scary, and we may not react in a way that is advantageous or beneficial to the person experiencing it. How, and this is certainly variable, I would assume. I don't have enough of a background in the symptoms, but how quickly do symptoms come on that could affect you? And I'm thinking kind of specifically, like if you're on the competition stage, could you have do you have an anxiety about something happening where you're like all of a sudden you have to step away?
Yeah, so usually I actually a fun fact, less than fun fact, is that I have yet to compete more than a month out from a concussion. So every time I've competed, I've actually like actively been in kind of the thick of symptoms and having to really carefully monitor those. And usually they're pretty predictable. I usually have flare ups if I hit my head again, which sometimes is like a small hit, sometimes it's a big hit, and my symptoms will spike again. But usually around competition and like big work things specifically, I'm just really carefully looking after my needs and making sure to kind of schedule my day so everything can be accommodated for and I have the space to rest that I need.
One of the things I mentioned was you had created this cocktail for Chicago's SEA. I have a copy here of the description that was written. It said, "This drink is a dreamy concoction of chilled Indonesian coffee, mango nectar, lime oleo," hope I said that right, saccharum, citra hops, and freeze distilled minor figures, which is a type of alternative milk, all infused with nitrogen. The result is a creamy beverage that tastes like peach candy. I tried this, not, I don't want to say completely unintentionally. Like, I wasn't thinking about what it was in it. I was thinking, oh, coffee drink. Yeah, that'll be fun. I'm going to grab that. And then
Mhm.
I put some of it in my mouth, and it was like, it stopped me in my tracks. It was such a unique flavor. I couldn't even tell you if I liked it in the moment. I had to really think about it and process what I was drinking. How do you start to develop a drink like that? Where does that process start to go from coffee is going to be part of it and I have to take it somewhere interesting and unique for the audience?
Yeah, so that drink was designed specifically for the USBC circuit this year. That I didn't get to end up serving because I got COVID the night before I was supposed to, or tested positive for COVID the night before I was supposed to compete at qualifiers. Luckily, Minor Figures had a booth at Expo and they were sponsoring me for the circuit. And they were like, hey, you never got to serve this to people. You should serve it here. So that was how I was able to bring it to the Expo floor. But with everything in competition, it's all built around the score sheet. So the score sheet with signature drinks is basically looking at how do you create a beverage that is focused on the coffee, that connects to the coffee conceptually, and that transforms the flavors that already exist in it. So I knew I wanted to pull kind of inspiration from different sources to tie the conceptual thread. And so I wanted to add like something that is specific to Java, something that is specific to baristas to kind of like thread that line of the connection across the supply chain of the industry. So I started researching like I Googled fruits that grow in Java. And I was like, okay, which one of these do I think I could work with? And mango and limes were two of the front ones. And I had worked with oleosaccharum last year, and really loved experimenting with the way that you can get some of the like zestiness of citrus without the sharpness of the acidity in it. So I knew I wanted to make a lime oleosaccharum, and then I knew that if I was using mango, I would probably use a mango nectar for the like creamy tactile it can have. I knew those two things going in. I knew it was going to have minor figures. And I actually set out trying to create like a milk punch kind of thing. And then I added the minor figures and it didn't curdle. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess a milk punch isn't going to happen. But then I found that I could get a really creamy tactile in the drink. And it wasn't like minor figures isn't an oat milk that like tastes like oats. It's like does a pretty different thing. So I found that I could use like a pretty good amount of it without it swallowing the profile of the coffee or like creating too many flavors that were specific to oats that I didn't want. So I always start out with cold coffee because cold coffee is generally more temperature stable. If you get a hot drink, the flavors are going to evolve as it sits, as it cools down. And I just kind of started messing around with ratios, and nitro charging a beverage is just a pretty easy way to get like a creamier tactile, which is always delightful. And I tasted the drink and it like the mango and the lime with like the creamy body kind of reminded me of a hazy IPA. So I was like, hops, Citra hops, which I don't really know much about hops. I just know that Citra hops are my favorite. So I was like, sure. And I added just 2 drops of Citra hop water that I made. And it was enough to get it was like it tied the thread of all of the flavors together. And it also created that like peachy aromatic drink.
It was really unique. I would say not a punch, but it kind of punched me in the mouth because it made me stop and think about it. When you create a drink like that, there's almost a drawing in the sand aspect to it, because where is this drink and drink recipe going to live moving forward beyond the competition circuit? So there is kind of this, I see this little Zen thing where you spend time creating something whose lifespan is relatively short as far as focused attention on it, right? Where do you take that experience now that you're beyond it? Obviously, you could always make that drink again, but it's also a lot of work and a very complex thing to do on a long-term basis. But where do you take that experience and maybe tie that into the next competition experience or teaching someone else?
Yeah. So I'm going to think about this one for a second. I think the cool thing about the competition structure and building a drink like this, or really any time you're spending a lot of time and energy with a certain set of ingredients and just messing around with ratios, essentially throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. It kind of, I think the time I've spent doing that has increased my capacity to like understand flavors and components in a more intuitive way, especially in competition. I go in and I kind of like have an idea of what I want to do, and it usually works out. And sometimes it's hard for me to understand why things are working out. I just like know it, or like I've spent enough time with enough like combination of ingredients that I can intuit like, okay, these things will taste good together, but if I break apart the pieces, it's like this is the acid, this is the bitterness, this is the sweetness, this is the thread, things like that. And so I think there's a part of that skill that I get to carry with me. I think the second part of that question was like helping other people or like supporting other
Yeah,
people.
I was reading somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you were also helping coach other competitors or another competitor in their process. So I'm assuming your experience leads into that sort of coaching and how that's different for you, competing versus participating.
Yeah.
You're passing something along, but then you're giving up control essentially at the last step.
Yeah. This past season was the first season that I had been like worn any kind of coach's hat. And it was definitely a learning experience for sure. Just kind of like when I train baristas, it's a lot about knowing when input is helpful and then how to make that input feel helpful and also make sure that people feel supported and confident about what they're doing. And coaching this year, my friend Gray Kaufman and their other coach, their partner Kay, they actually helped me get out to Rancho Cucamonga because I didn't get to make it to nationals, and was really bummed to miss out on that experience this year. So they were like, "You should come and coach, and we can all like hang out, and it'll be great," which was really fun to be involved, like to sit in the chair during a practice time and help taste all of the drinks and help develop all of the flavor notes. For some reason, truly am a nerd about the way that the competition is scored and like the best like language that you need to use for things to score really well. So it was really fun to help them work with that. And then watching someone else who you've like are really rooting for and invested in, like knowing all of the process behind the things. I always have a timer on my watch and I'm just like counting down the seconds to make sure they don't go over time and seeing if they get their cues and guessing how long their shots are pulling based on their reactions to them. It's a very like empathetic nervousness where you're just like watching all of it unfold.
For anyone listening, we've talked about competitions on the show before, but just to clarify, it's a whole combination of skill sets. It's not just I made a coffee for you to try and here it is. There's a presentation to it, a description to it, and you're doing it all on a timer with people watching you and judging you the whole time. And it's a very high pressure situation. I would think as the coach, I would be hiding like in the back of the crowd, like trying not to get too nervous because I've given up that control. But I know that we are all more than just our passion for coffee. And that is sometimes I forget that. I forget that about myself and for other people. But I'm wondering just a little bit more about you. You mentioned earlier that you're trans, and I'm wondering if being a trans person on the competition circuit in particular, it does raise your profile a bit. Is that something important to you to represent, or do you wish people didn't have to talk about it or have to address it, or you didn't have to?
That's a really great question.
Like, which is better, right? Like, I have the platform, but should I even have to?
Yeah, so I don't even know how to start to answer this because my brain is just fireworking in a bunch of different directions. Um, I guess I'll say that like I would love to live in a world where it's a thing that doesn't have to be a thing, if that makes sense. And the reality is that in this world, trans visibility is so important for the safety of trans people and the like happiness of trans people. I think that seeing folks who are out as trans, like for me, is something that always feels really, really special. Like when I hear about trans people just like kicking ass in different in different parts of the world or in coffee specifically. And I've seen in coffee where there's a lot of inclusion efforts that fall short, and a lot of trans people kind of having to bend over backwards to have their pronouns respected, to, I mean, get access to the kind of healthcare they need, to have other people take their concerns for safety seriously. And I think that that's where visibility becomes really important, right? Because it's like, hey, we're here, and these are what our experiences are like. And I also think there's a part of it because I kind of like all of my coming out queerness journey has happened with and around coffee community, which is where I have built most of the queer community that I have. So there's a part of it that feels like kind of sacred, getting to share these parts of me that have always been super foundational in my coffee journey and in my life with other people. And I think that last year, my routine was built around like sharing pieces of the South with the judges based on a washed Ethiopian coffee that like aromatically and flavor wise tastes like everything I grew up around, which felt really special. And like 2 weeks before I was supposed to do it, I was like, oh, this feels so complicated because I'm about to talk about the South and everyone has opinions on the South right now. And everyone likes to say their piece about how much Florida sucks. And when people are really dismissive of the South, and the reality is that there are so many queer people here. And it felt really important to me to make space for like, yeah, like queer people are in the South, and it's important that like people are paying attention to that, because like we deserve to be safe. And I think especially in coffee, it's like coffee is so queer, and I wish that more parts of the industry like, like did the leg of work that's required to make queer people feel safe inside of it. You know what I mean?
If that's not a t-shirt sometime soon, we are not doing what we're supposed to be doing in the world. Well, I think one of the things you're kind of addressing is when you're a community that isn't overtly and obviously recognized. Like everyone who's ever looked at me has known, who I am, and it was never a question of what my identity was for the most part. And I wasn't questioning it, so I never thought about it. The more experience you have with other people and the more I'm able to recognize other communities existed as I'm growing up as a human being, the more you become aware of how your actions, whether they are, forget right and wrong, but you realize how they impact others, and you have to make decisions for yourself how you want to proceed. Am I willing to inconvenience myself to make things better for someone else? Am I willing to say just because it was that way doesn't mean it should be that way? How much effort am I willing to put in? And in a world where life is already pretty hard, yeah, for everyone, but harder for some, and or less obviously, there isn't as obvious of a path. Maybe I'm not saying that entirely intuitively, or not intuitively, but intelligently. I don't know. I think that is something that I've always struggled with and grown with. And every time I think I have the world figured out, I'm confronted with the idea that maybe people aren't as black or white as I thought, as good or bad as I thought. There's this whole middle area in the South in particular. You mentioned everyone likes to bag on the South, in Florida in particular. My dad lives in Florida, and I'm always giving him a hard time. We have some fun back and forths about that, as fathers and sons do. What I'm hearing from you is to say that just because there might be a stereotype happening, or there might be this happening politically, doesn't mean there aren't real people here making real life decisions and trying to live a life where they are just normal, happy, accepted part of society. Is that a mistake in the way I'm putting that?
No, that's absolutely true. I think a lot of the folks who are really dismissive of the South, their solution is like, well, just leave. If you're not safe there, just leave.
Sure.
And I think that's the cheapest way out, and also a pretty half-assed way to look at what's actually happening. Because entire demographics of people shouldn't have to be displaced to feel safe. And yeah, I think it's kind of trying to subvert the work that has to be done, because the fact that that work has to be done is uncomfortable and it's scary. And I think a lot of people say, I hate Florida, instead of I hate Florida's political leaders, which are two different things, right?
Sure.
In Florida memes, all fine and good. People are really, really courageous with how they handle alligators in that state. And that's okay. That's an okay thing to
Sure.
make memes about and make jokes about. But I think it's important to not erase whole groups of people because you can't understand why someone would want to live in a place that's maybe politically hard to be in.
Well, and politics are things that over a timeline change. Maybe the timeline hasn't been long enough in a certain place, or whatever, but it shines a light on the value of voting, and the importance of it, whether we are super pumped about who's up for election or not. You're always trying to navigate that boat one click at a time in the direction that you hope that it goes. Any other things, kind of in particular, that stand out to you as like these are things that represent who I am? I have a little note to myself about riding bicycles. I'm a bicyclist as well. But
Heck yeah.
what are things that, make you feel like you?
Yeah, I love riding my bicycle. I think it was earlier this year, I kind of had this revelation where it's like, it's not that I just want to ride my bike, it's that I need to ride my bike. Because
Yes.
it's so good for me. It helps my mood. It helps with like the visual aspects of my concussion recovery and my chronic symptoms. It's how I connect with nature and with people in my community. And I mean, Atlanta is pretty car dependent, and I really wish it wasn't. But it also kind of connects to my like fervor about wanting more public transportation and more alternative forms of transportation that are less individualistic and more accessible.
I'm a big believer in cycling, and the idea that I need to bicycle is something I relate to, only because when I look at parts of my life that have seemed harder, they're generally parts of my life where I didn't make time for that thing that was important to me, and that was one of them, because that makes everything harder because you're sacrificing a part of yourself. Atlanta, my experience in Atlanta is pretty minimal. Coke Museum, Six Flags.
The classics.
Yeah, not much further than that. Martin Luther King Memorial. We're going to change that. My wife and I are on our way to Atlanta this summer for a visit. I'm wondering about your future, in near future, long term, however you want to address it. But in coffee, what's coming next for you?
That is the big question. Um, I will say there are a lot of unknowns. I have been in the role of like primarily training baristas for a little over 3 years now. And I really loved it. And I've kind of through the process decided that I don't always like have to be working with people, but well, no, I kind of always have to be working with people. I think that the things that drive me are like human connection, and the ways that we connect with each other and with different things. And so I think whatever is the next thing that makes sense, it's probably connected to that. I really love my community here in Atlanta, and I've been like really happy to kind of tap into the pieces of it that still feel inexhaustive. Like I'm still meeting people in coffee who I haven't met yet, and still meeting other folks in like arts industries and just in the broader food and bev world who continue to just like absolutely blow me away with their passion and their drive for community and hospitality experiences. And I think a lot outside of that is unknown, except for the fact that I will be competing again next season because I do have my spot in qualifiers that I intend to see through.
Well, I will be certainly paying attention to see how that goes. I only have a few questions left. I appreciate all the time we've spent together already, but you, as a trainer of baristas, you're somewhat responsible for the next generations of coffee people. In that process, and as you have been teaching others and working and coaching as well for competition, is there any sort of advice or any sort of message that you pass along that you find to be essential to that process? Maybe not so much like this is what this ingredient is, but some sort of messaging to say, hey, this is how we should be, or we treat coffee. I don't want to lead you too far down the path. Piece of advice. How about that?
I love that question, and I feel almost a little emotional thinking about like the next generation of baristas or people who are like starting their coffee career, because obviously coffee has been a really important and foundational part of my life for so long. I think I would say that when someone says they believe in you, believe them and really let that motivate you, and like it'll open up so much space to kind of grow inside of and to be curious and to do things you never thought you could do. But if someone looks at you and said, hey, you could do this, like my friend Danny who said, hey, you could win this one day, that kind of belief is just like one of the most special things that will take you so far. I also think that once I can't remember where I read this or listened to this or who told it to me, but I operate on this philosophy of I take my work seriously and I do not take myself seriously. And that has been so integral to my day-to-day time in coffee and in life, because I, treat things with respect, intentionality, and hard work and seriousness when that is demanded. And outside of that, it's really important to have fun and to know that you're going to make a mistake, because we're all silly, goofy humans trying to figure out how to live in the world. And so I think that's helped me maintain and return to a sense of lightness in my life that has been really important, and the interest of keeping going with all of it.
I end all of these shows with a little tagline of I hope that you have enough sanity left to make it through the day. And that's because this show started during COVID. But I found that, despite our wavering attention on COVID, that statement to me applies to my every single day. At some point, I have to stop and
Yeah.
go, okay, are you losing it today, or where are you at? And just take a breath. And I find that to be a really an important way to address how the rest of my day is going to go. Before we get to our most the question that everybody always asks me, but I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Is there anything that you wanted to share today that I didn't get to, or I didn't ask, or I glossed over too quickly?
Um, I don't think so.
Great.
Yeah, I think we touched on all of it.
Then I will close out today by asking you that, let's say you're on your bike just on a fun little Sunday ride and you see a new coffee shop that looks pretty good and you stop in. What are you going to order?
Ooh, probably an espresso. It depends on the shop, but I love trying different coffees on espresso. And if it's not an espresso, it's going to be whatever signature drink that barista is most excited about.
Addison, I really appreciate that you took time to spend with me and share all this. I really appreciate that you made that coffee cocktail, because it really was eye-opening for me that day and kind of snapped me out of convention fervor, which I was certainly in. And I hope that the next stages are as exciting and hopefully successful as you've been so far.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for your feedback on that drink. It's really cool to hear how different people have interacted with it. And I definitely saw a lot of people take sips of it at Expo and they were like, wait, what did I just drink? This is not just coffee.
No, it was like a revelation, truly. Like, it made me stop and think about, okay, I know I've been drinking coffee all day, but just be more aware. Dang, Addison. I got a little emotional seeing you get emotional talking about coffee. Okay, back to work. Some key takeaways from the podcast. From an early age, we're all looking for our community, the place where we feel like we belong, a place where we can love and be passionate about the things in our life that bring us joy, things like coffee. Addison's journey started in Florida, and as the things that mattered to them felt imperiled, they sought out a new community, which they found in the coffee people of Atlanta, Georgia, and at Perc Coffee in particular. Addison found inspiration and validation in the niche corner of coffee that is competition. Specialty coffee is only a small portion of the overall coffee industry. That's true despite how invested myself or you or anyone else feels about the industry. The competition corner of specialty coffee is a smaller community still. Finally, I asked Addison before the show if it was okay that we addressed their challenges with post-concussion syndrome, and if we could talk about trans representation in coffee. There may be a time in the future where disabilities or race or gender and sexuality aren't talking points in conversations like this. Not because they're topics we avoid or ignore, but because we've moved beyond them as stopping points in how we see each other. But the world isn't there yet, even if it has made steps in the right direction. Until then, I appreciate it when humans like Addison share their story, and I hope this podcast is a space where our guests feel that their voices will be heard and shared to the best of our ability. We're still learning, and we assume that all of you are too. So thanks to Addison for sharing their coffee journey and for making me take a moment at Expo to really think about the coffee that I was drinking. I'd also like to shout out Minor Figures for sponsoring that booth. Of all the gin joints in all the world, for some reason I stopped at that one, and it led me to here. Finally, I'll share all of the important links from this edition of the podcast in the show notes, as well as in our newsletter found online at coffeepeoplepodcast.com. Be sure to follow Addison on Instagram at @aspecialtybean, and of course check out perccoffee.com. Thank you for listening to the Coffee People Podcast. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please tap that follow button, and if you can, give us all of the stars that they offer, 5, 4, 6, 100. I'm not quite sure which is which. Those stars do help other people find us, although not as much as word of mouth. So if you're choosing between stars and telling a friend, tell a friend. We certainly appreciate it. We're always telling our Coffee People friends about Roastar coffee packaging, which you can find online at roastar.com. They're our presenting sponsor. They help coffee companies and snack companies and beverage companies tell the big story of their small businesses. They work with you to ensure that in a sea of competitors, your packaging will stand out. This show also exists because we have great coffee industry partners that we want you to check out and support and drink their coffee or buy green coffee or even a roasting machine from them. They include Zumbar Coffee and Tea, Steady State Roasting, Coffee Cycle Roasting, Maria Coffee, and Cape Horn Green Coffee importers. We send a special thank you out to Crossings Coffee and Hasea Coffee Source, who've been supporting our Coffee Smarter efforts. Be sure to check out those shows, Coffee Smarter and Coffee Smarter Pro. You can find them wherever you're listening to this podcast. Our full city partners include Ignite Coffee Company, Ascend Coffee Roasters, Civets Roasting Machines, Me and My Uncle Coffee, Craft 42 Roasters up in Canada, and Cozy Canine Coffee. Thank you for listening to and sharing this podcast. Thank you for sending us questions and being coffee curious. This show, the Coffee People Podcast, is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network. This episode has been written, produced, researched, and recorded by me, Ryan Woldt. I hope this episode has found you happy, healthy, and with at least a thread of sanity left, enabling you to make it through the day. I pause only because there's a siren and my thread is getting thinner. Always tip your baristas and be sure to drink good coffee. If you are in the early stages of your coffee journey, we want to support you. Check out the Coffee Smarter Education podcasts. Coffee Smarter is designed to enable coffee drinkers to brew a better cup of coffee at home. And Coffee Smarter Pro covers industry-specific topics for baristas, roasters, shop owners, and aspiring coffee professionals. You'll find both shows on your favorite podcast platforms or on our website at coffeesmarterpodcast.com.